can you explain about what is brain injury, maybe a little bit about slosh theory, and then talk a bit about what you've been doing in this space?
Well, I was actually the owner of a wound care company, strangely enough, and found myself in front of our Army research lab. At the time, we had come up with a way of helping soldiers not bleed out on the battlefield. And when we were done, the project coordinator came up, put his arm around me and said, "Oh, that was really clever, Doc. I wish clever people would figure out traumatic brain injuries, as we've got tens of billions of dollars and 50 years of research, and we haven't moved the needle." And they're right. Believe it or not, even helmet manufacturers had to take off the word anti-concussive off of their helmets when they came out to market. So ultimately, about 6 months later, utilizing biomimicry and looking to how the little creatures of the forest are able to prevent brain injury, we did come up with the first and only medical device to prevent traumatic brain injury. And one of the reasons I went down that pathway is one of the people in the audience actually said, "I think if somebody could just figure out how a woodpecker can smack its head into a tree 80 million times at 12 times the force that we humans get injured, wouldn't this whole thing be figured out?" So you can better believe I went right to that woodpecker first and started learning more about that physiology. So brain injury turns out to be due to the movement of the brain inside the skull. Now, certainly if you have a penetrating injury, that's not all the case. But for most concussions and things of that nature, even if you're in a car and you're racing me and you're in a tank, we'll say, and I'm in a car and we slam into an embankment at 70 miles an hour, we're both going to die because our brains continue to move forward. And you might have an expensive dashboard on your face. I may have an inexpensive one on mine, but our brains keep moving and are damaged by ending up sloshing, as it's called, through the liquids inside your brain cavity and into the back of your or front of your skull. So that's what we realized very early on, that nature had come up with all these amazing ways, and two major ones, in fact, that actually help to prevent the brain from moving around inside the skull. And that's the direction we took.
Mm. And so, how does CO2 play a role in this in terms of like blood flow and how much slosh there is? Can you just give us a bit of that?
Sure thing. So as I mentioned, there are two different ways that the brain actually, or the body actually, can be improved upon as far as their, we'll call it concussive tolerance. And one turned out to be jugular compression, which actually backfills the cranial space by about an Easter egg worth of fluid. 4 milliliters is all it takes. And CO2 actually raises the intracranial volume as well. Now, if we all want to get medical about it, it's called the compensatory reserve volume. And when you stand upright, suddenly a tiny amount of fluid comes out of your cranial space and your eyeballs sink and recess in and your eardrums recess in. It's such a small amount externally that you really don't notice it. But with our high sophisticated radiology techniques, we can measure it exactly. And so that's what we did. And we were able to demonstrate that with jugular compression, with our device that we had invented, and with our newest technology, which is to help you rebreathe your own CO2, we know that the CO2, the fluid also rises and the compensatory reserve volume fills up in your brain, just like airbags or seat belts and bubble wrap. Your brain is now protected from what's called hydrodynamics. I coined that as slosh, and brain slosh is something that you can block, and you can't just yawn out on the football field. Your coach is going to bench you, and you can't go out onto a battlefield and start yawning. So what we did was give that physiology to mankind on demand. And here, helmets can't claim a 1% reduction in brain injury. Our animal study showed an 83% reduction in brain injury. And when we switched over into our human studies, which we can't sacrifice the human after the study and get an exact number, but even the FDA said a 75% reduction in brain injury in humans.
Yeah, that's insane, isn't it? That's incredible. What's the yawn doing then? So just break down the yawn, because I always want to know, like, how would the yawn increase blood flow to the brain?
Well, believe it or not, prior to our work, no one really knew for sure. I mean, there are all these crazy theories. I'm sorry to call them crazy if somebody out in the audience was the one that came up with this, but they talked about brain cooling and all kinds of different things. Well, it turns out that there's a digastric muscle attached to the jaw such that when you raise your arm and open your mouth widely, the digastric actually occludes your jugulars in two places. When you raise your arms up, called pandiculation, in order to yawn, there's a muscle that attaches to the omohyoid, attaches to the jugular vein, and goes right through your body, attaching to your shoulder blade. And when your shoulders turn inward to raise your arms up, you occlude your jugulars in 4 different places. So if people fear our Q collar, which I just happened to throw one out here for you guys to see, this actually puts continuous gentle pressure right over the jugulars, right exactly where the omohyoids are. And we mimic exactly what happens in nature in a yawn. And that raises that volume just a tiny amount, but it's enough to prevent brain injury.
Yeah, isn't that incredible? And so, I believe I don't want to misquote you here, so I'll ask you to explain it. But the CO2 levels are actually lower on the planet than they used to be for humanity. And so, actually, if CO2 levels were back to where they were when X was, this wouldn't have been such an issue. And I might have completely butchered that. So, just give us an explanation about CO2
You did a
levels.
nice job, actually, but if you go back and you look at this planet, it seems to be at its healthiest back in the Precambrian and the Jurassic Park times. This is when there are massive dinosaurs roaming and romping the earth, and I'm not so sure I want to trudge through dinosaur manure, don't get me wrong, but it just seemed like all the plants were doing great and all the animals could grow to unbelievable levels, and the CO2 seemed to be coming out into the earth by way of volcanic production. At the end of the day, that's almost 6,000 parts per million was the CO2 level back in those two areas. Well, now we're way down at just 400 parts per million. And there are very brilliant scientists that have identified that because carbon dioxide is plant food, that plants can't exist if the CO2 drops down to 280, and we've dropped down into the low 300s, and that's on this planet. So it's a theory, but it seems to me, after looking at all these other different creatures of the forest, head-ramming sheep and giraffe and all these other creatures that seemingly have found ways to hold on to CO2, that maybe they're doing that in a setting of the environment dropping its CO2, and they need that carbon dioxide. So there was a doctor back in 1950 that literally called the carbon dioxide the most ubiquitous hormone of the body. Carbon dioxide is used more than any other molecule to signal from one place to another. So the definition of a hormone is something that's built in one area, having its an effect at a different area. And that's what the body does. It utilizes CO2 in so many fascinating ways. It's become my life's focus for about 15 years now.
Yeah, no, really interesting. Okay, so CO2 levels have actually dropped in history. Do you see the same sort of traumatic brain injuries happening in like gorillas and chimpanzees? Do our primates suffer from the same problems we suffer from? Hey, just pausing the podcast for a second to talk about raw optics. Now, look, we all know food and water matter, but what if I told you light might just be as important? And I'm not just talking any light, I'm talking natural light. Your biology evolved under the sun, but now we're surrounded by all this artificial junk, and it scrambles our circadian rhythm, it crushes our mitochondria, and it leaves us feeling off. That low-key fatigue, the restless sleep, often it's related to light. And raw optics makes glasses that bring your light environment back into harmony with nature. Their lenses filter out the harmful frequencies and they let the healing ones through. Built by top scientists, used by the world's best, these things are serious. Use code TADB10 at rawoptics.com for 10% off and take back your light. That's TADB10 at rawoptics.com. You have no idea how good you're designed to feel until you do. All right, let's get back on with the show. Cheers.
Well, I know that these creatures that have massive amounts of impacts in their world, such as a head-ramming sheep, they suffer 500 G impacts on a regular basis. You and I are usually concussed with 100 Gs, and if you start getting at 150, you are probably going to be in a major league traumatic brain injury. We also have giraffes that they actually vie for their mates. They actually protect themselves against lions' attacks and things of that nature. And it turns out that their carbon dioxide level is massively high in comparison to ours as well. So
Mm.
it would appear that these creatures have found ways to modulate and rebreathe their own carbon dioxide in order to raise the CO2. And it was our premise that, hey, maybe it's the CO2 that's in fact protecting them. So here at the University of Cincinnati, we took off with the Department of Neuropharmacology, Dr. Matt Robeson. We took two set strains of genetically identical mice, and we subjected one set of mice to carbon dioxide at about 2 to 3%. And then the other mice, which were just placed in room air, right? They were all then subjected to an IED level of blast. And we were able to demonstrate that the mice that were subjected to a tiny amount of CO2 had a 70% reduction in traumatic brain injury markers.
Wow.
And the only thing, everything kept the same. The only thing different was that environmental CO2, which we know physiologically raises that intracranial volume and takes up that little wiggle room, if you will, inside the cranial space. And wow, that just dramatic reduction in brain
Yeah.
injury, very similar to our first device, which was the Q collar.
Wow. There's so many areas we're going to dive into today. It feels a bit like Christmas actually on the breathing podcast and CO2. Let's jump into altitude then, because you've got some very interesting stuff on Everest and what top reasons why people die. So if you could just explain a bit about that, and then let's jump into the mask and all that sort of stuff.
So it turns out that altitude illness and a brain injury are not really that different if you look into the literature and you delve into actually the physiology of what's going on. So I became incredibly intrigued at what's going on at altitude. And the literature is quite clear that the singular physiological response that occurs at high altitude is actually a lack of oxygen causing you to breathe faster. Well, if you start breathing quickly, called tachypnea, you'll end up diving your carbon dioxide level down, and that starts to cause all of the problems that we actually are now calling altitude illness. So you can go back in the literature, and Yale actually published an article in the journal Nature, probably our most prestigious journal ever, and they talked about the fact that carbon dioxide just dramatically reverses high altitude illness. And so this was a lot of fun for me because I'd already created a device to do just that, to make you rebreathe your own carbon dioxide in a very exacting and harmless way. And up I trudged up to the top of a 14,000-foot mountain out in Colorado to try to make my symptoms as bad as I possibly could. I literally got off the plane. My Cincinnati is at 300 feet in altitude. Got off the plane, got a rental car, and flew to the top of that mountain as quickly as I could. About 3/4 of the way up, I stopped at a little cabin that had 5 steps. I couldn't get up the steps. And I have the lungs of a whale. I was actually a competitive swimmer my whole life. I just couldn't believe the symptoms that were just literally dumping on me. And at 14,000 feet, here I had all my tests and procedures. I had all my equipment and everything to do. I was walking across the parking lot just to get to the observation area. I couldn't make it. I just could not walk 50 feet. So I went back into the trunk, got my little Sage rebreather, as it's called. We'll talk about that more if you wish. Put this on, raised my CO2 by 1%, and all of my symptoms were gone in just 2 minutes' time. So I knew that the theory that was out there, that the CO2 is the cause for most of this, it seemed to me that I might be onto something. So being the academic, if you will, or the researcher, if you will, we set out to try to flesh this out a little bit more exactingly. So, if you're interested, I actually did my own little study, didn't publish this one, on what actually happened on Mount Everest. Everest is fascinating because the people that go that climb Mount Everest are some of the best athletes in the entire world. And yet one after another have died up at the top of Mount Everest. And so it became very curious to me, what in the world caused their death? I mean, was it exposure because of the extreme cold? Could it have been high altitude cerebral edema or high altitude pulmonary edema? I mean, what actually caused their death? Well, believe it or not, it was witnessed. They usually go up in teams, and their buddies just said, well, I don't know. He just got up and just walked right off the edge of a cliff. They
Mm.
become so confused and disoriented because at 26,000 feet, you breathe roughly 80 times per minute. And your carbon dioxide, which should be a partial pressure of 35 to 40, drops down to 10. And at 20, your brain can't work. So that seemingly has been something, is this thread that was kind of going through mankind's history with altitude. And
Mm.
others just seem to kind of miss the boat, in my opinion, as to, oh my God, it's CO2 that's causing this problem. And we were able to demonstrate that as well in a lab setting, that just adding back that CO2 mitigates all these problems. So it appears that this most ubiquitous hormone, the thing that is found more than anything else, is being used by the body. And it looks like we might be able to bolster that a little bit by breathing correctly. That's your world. Or adding a device to do it in a very exacting amount.
Mm.
Either way, it's very healthful and very protective for people to be able to have their CO2 levels set at the right level.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And did you just say it was the average respiratory rate was 80 breaths per minute on Everest?
On the top of Everest, if you do not
Wow.
have oxygen up at the top of Everest, your respiratory rate goes to 80. And I'm going to say this again, a normal partial pressure. So if you think about this, it's the pressure here at sea level is 760 millimeters of mercury. It's a way of identifying the pressure of the gas that's around us right now. Some of that's vapor, and so that's about 47 or 50 millimeters of mercury. So when we start talking about a partial pressure of carbon dioxide, normally at sea level, it's around 35 to 40 that gets into our alveoli and into our body's bloodstream, right? And so if something causes a change or perturbates that in some manner, shape, or form, such as all of a sudden there's no oxygen around, then all of a sudden you're going to breathe incessantly when you don't necessarily want to do that so quickly. And
Yeah.
down goes your carbon dioxide level.
See, the inner breath coach in me is lit up now. And I'm like, we're trying to get people down to around 12 breaths per minute, as like an optimal range, or even 11. How do we know it's 80? Has there been a study? How many people is it based on? Where does that number come from?
Yeah, the literature's clear. I mean, when they go on these expeditions, they attached all kinds of devices to these people. And I'm stunned to tell you that one of the doctors actually put an intracerebral bolt in his head and climbed up Everest. So I'm telling you, some of the people in the past and what they did for the sake of science is just unbelievable. But it helped weird inventor types like me to realize that, wait a minute, I mean, first of all, they believe in what they're doing, which is to take on the scientific method to attack problems. But on top of that, it shows us exactly in a better exacting way what might actually be occurring.
Yes. Do you have any, and this may be too out there, but do you have any idea what the Sherpas' respiratory rates might be on Everest? So those more indigenous to the zone?
I don't, but if you're there for prolonged periods of time, you have other ways to adapt as well. So there's something called 2,3-DPG. This is a chemical that actually changes the ability of carbon dioxide to attach to the hemoglobin molecule. So there's that carbon dioxide again, right? So 2,3-DPG helps to enable the oxygen to jump off of the hemoglobin molecule and get into the brain tissue or muscle tissue or whatever. And so that is something that long distance runners will do. They will literally go up to mountains and they will run up there for incessant periods of time, usually to cause the body an uncomfortable situation, and the body realizes, hey, I've got to make my oxygen more available to me, so I'm going to raise my 2,3-DPG. Problem is, if you just showed up to ski and you haven't been at that altitude for a month or more, you don't have any extra 2,3-DPG. So all of these horrible symptoms of high altitude illness can hit you. Usually the first one is headache. So when you start going to altitude, the altitude symptoms usually start at 5,000 feet. About 80% of people develop something at 8,000 feet, and that something is frequently headache or insomnia. You just lay there at night, and I've gone through this. I mean, it destroys my first 2 days of any trip to altitude. I literally have to go back to bed and try to bring my headache under control, bring the fact that I haven't slept an entire 2 nights in a row. And even the Colorado Tourism Bureau thinks that they've lost something in the range of $500 million annually, because when people show up to the high altitude ski resorts, the first 2 days, they can't go out and buy things and dinners and go out and enjoy. They're just miserable. So we believe we've actually found a way to help people, and you're absolutely spot on when you try to train people to breathe through their noses. So we have all these sinuses in our skull, and honestly, there have been a lot of theories put out to why nature would have done it. Some of them are kind of silly in my mind. They actually think that it can change the tone of your voice, and that's why nature and natural selection chose to put these sinuses there. And can you imagine a shark or a tiger not eating you because your voice is deeper? I'm sorry, I just don't believe that, right? And then there's talk of it filtering the air. Well, the amount of filtration in your sinus passages compared to the rest of your body is equivalent to a business card down on a tennis court. That's how much surface area your lungs and filtering capacity have. Hard for me to believe that an extra business card of surface area is going to do anything. But what those sinuses have in them is your exhaled gases from the prior breath. So instead of having 0.04 percentage of CO2 in your sinuses, you have 4% CO2 in your sinuses. And when you breathe through your nose and then rebreathe back in, you rebreathe your own CO2. That's called dead space rebreathing, and it raises your partial pressure of CO2 by about 2 to 3 millimeters of mercury. And that doesn't sound like much, but it's a dramatic improvement in your quality of life. We've been able to demonstrate that it eradicates sleep apnea, and snoring improves, and all these things just because you're breathing through your nose. There's an enormous number of articles that are out there that shows that young children that either have a defect or born without their sinuses, they have learning disabilities. And people with attention deficit disorder do poorly if they mouth breathe. So if people can be retrained and improve their quality of gas that they're bringing into their body, they can optimize all these wonderful parameters of living. And I applaud you for also figuring this out on your own and going and helping people learn that there is a better way.
Yeah. Well, I can't take any credit for it. I'm on the shoulders of many breathing giants, including James Nestor and Patrick McEwen, all these beautiful people that teach this and have wrote the literature. I need to dig into some of this because, again, I'm so excited. Just what was that? Was it a molecule 2,3 something BG? What was that called?
2,3-DPG. And I do have a chemistry degree, but I'm going to probably mugger this up here, but I think it's diphosphoglycerate.
Okay.
Please don't hold me to that.
No.
It's been
Just
40 years since I've got my chemistry degree.
What does it mean? What does it mean, though? No, what I'm curious to know is, what's it doing to the hemoglobin? How is it helping the release of oxygen?
So it's an absolutely beautiful thing. The hemoglobin molecule is probably my favorite molecule, right up there with carbon dioxide. And it turns out that hemoglobin does not have a central processing unit, doesn't have any computer on it, and it doesn't, when it goes through your lungs, it has to literally open and grab an oxygen molecule, and then know that when it goes through your brain, it has to somehow close and spit that oxygen molecule into your brain. Well, what tells it to do that? When it's in an artery and it looks up, all it sees is the inside of an arterial wall. So what indicates to that hemoglobin molecule whether or not to grab a hold of it or to release it? Well, it turns out it's all carbon dioxide. You guessed it. and I've guessed it. And at the end of the day, there are other mechanisms that help that hemoglobin molecule know to release the oxygen as well. And one of them is 2,3-DPG. So 2,3-DPG helps the hemoglobin molecule think there's more carbon dioxide, because there's
Mm.
more carbon dioxide in your brain and in your muscles than there are in your lungs.
Mm.
So in your lungs, you're getting the ambient outside environmental CO2, which is 0.04. Whereas when you're inside the brain tissue, there could be 100 times that much CO2. And that's what triggers a conformational change, just like a catcher's mitt, that actually forces the oxygen off of the hemoglobin and delivers it to the tissues.
Okay. And is it something you take orally? Is it an injection? Does it release in certain parts of the body, or does it do it everywhere? How does it
Yeah.
work?
Mostly your bone marrow is making that, and don't hold me to that one either.
Okay.
I actually didn't look that one up, but it would make sense to me that either your liver or your bone marrow is the site of the manufacturing of this chemical.
Okay.
So, to my knowledge, there's no way to even take it orally. It would probably be destroyed by your stomach
Right. Okay,
acids
so
to
this
try
isn't something
and
people are taking on Everest then. This isn't a drug people are taking. This is something
I
being
know,
produced
but
in the
you can
body.
trigger it again by becoming hypoxic for long periods of
Right.
time,
I
which means
understand
low
now.
oxygen
Gotcha.
environments like running or hiking up into the mountains for a long time.
I understand. Okay. So it's not, I thought it was like a treatment they were getting on the top of Everest to help keep them alive. No, it's something.
I think they
Yeah.
would. I think the world would love to have something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Sounds like it. That's why I got so excited. Okay. All right. That makes sense.
There is, interestingly, a chemical that has been
Yes.
used for decades called Diamox.
Uh-huh.
This pill is taken for altitude illness and the protection thereof. And interestingly enough, this is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. Now,
Mm.
carbonic, you can tell right there, it has to do with CO2. And so what it actually is doing at a molecular level all the way down into your mitochondria is, believe it or not, trying to make CO2 work better inside that molecule. So we thought, oh boy, we'll never be able to compete with a pharmaceutical pill that does this, right? Well, the literature says that it's only about 11% effective. And on top of that, it has all kinds of terrible side effects, including birth defects in women if they happen to be on the pill when they conceive, and just as bad or almost as bad for us men is it makes our alcohol taste terrible. So if you're out on a ski trip and you've brought your beautiful lady with you, boy, I don't know. Yeah, this is not going to be pretty when she won't take her Diamox because she's worried about being pregnant, and the guy won't even consider anything like that because he can't stand his alcohol anymore. So there's a lot of side effects to that medication. And here we can just go right to the source and we can help you rebreathe your own CO2 now and eradicate those problems of nighttime sleep apnea, which is what causes the trouble with insomnia,
Yeah.
and helps to improve your CO2 throughout the
Yeah.
evening.
That's amazing. So probably not taking those drugs is not, it's not necessarily a good thing to be dependent on those for altitude sickness. We're going to dig into the mask. I want to just talk a little bit about dead space then. So how much dead space do we typically have in the sinuses? What's that capacity roughly?
Well, amazingly, it's not that much.
Okay.
So if you're a grown person, we're talking about anywhere from 30 to 55 milliliters.
Okay.
That is, again, perhaps the size of an Easter egg in total, somewhere, or not an Easter egg, but a regular egg,
Oh,
right?
right. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so that doesn't sound like much, but it doesn't require much. It turns out that when I went to altitude, I just could not believe how much I was salivating, right? And it stunned me. And then I came back to Cincinnati and I started looking into it. I mean, do people actually salivate, or am I a mutant? I just couldn't believe the amount of saliva. And then when I swallowed the saliva, I would burping incessantly, because what's in saliva is bicarbonate. And when that hits the hydrochloric acid in the stomach, it turns into carbon dioxide and water. That's why Tums and things of this nature help to reduce the acid ingestion that you might have. So it occurred to me that maybe the reason that nature has figured out that it needed to have more carbon dioxide up on top of that mountain, and she had a way of creating it. Nature always finds a way, right? And what she apparently might be doing is increasing the body's salivation, where bicarbonate lives, turning that into carbon dioxide. And then in the literature, it says a burp is over 20% CO2. So if you burp and then rebreathe some of that burp, you're getting tiny amounts of elevation of your CO2, and you just feel better. So I don't want everybody burping constantly when they're up at their ski resorts, but believe it or not, that may be what the body's trying to do.
Mm. But so I remember when you told me this a couple of weeks ago, and I was just overthinking the burp. I was like, this is fascinating, like burping breath work. Ironically, there is some old I think it's pranayamas where they do actually burp and they keep the air down, and it's meant to travel through the intestines and come out the other end, and that's meant to be quite I forget anyway. But I was just thinking, like, but do people report that they're burping more? Because I would feel like if that was a natural trigger point, would we say, oh, we see an elevation in burps? Or is it more of a, no, our body doesn't naturally burp more at altitude, but you can burp? You see what I'm asking there? Like, is there a reflex of altitude and an increased amount of burping?
Well, herein lies the problem of me, Dr. Dave, right? So a lot of other people have not necessarily gone down this pathway, trying, you're not going to find pharmaceutical companies paying to find out who burps, and you're not going to get the National Institute of Health and all these things to do these studies. So many times it's anecdotal discussions of, hey, I've been up on the mountain. I can't believe I'm burping so much. And
Okay.
others will describe, the fact that the burp might have made them feel better up there. I mean, a lot of this is just not proven science. And keep in mind, there's only data for and data against your premise. There's no proof of anything. So, I even can give you statements of what I think we found, and I want to caution everybody. I'm not making these dogmatic statements that I'm right and others are wrong, but there's an enormous amount of evidence, and I will call it sometimes circumstantial evidence. Other times it's prospective, double-blinded, beautiful, placebo-controlled studies that demonstrate that this occurs. Most of what I found about burping is personal experience, number one. So absolutely every time I go to altitude, that's what I'm doing. When I'm up at 14,000 feet, I find myself salivating and burping. And I was able to corroborate that. Again, this isn't proof, but I was able to corroborate that the literature does describe burping at altitude. And
Wow.
here others have put forth theories as to why that is. But to me, people are just missing the boat and not realizing that it's carbon dioxide that's causing this. And so, when I call it having CO2 lined glasses, I look through a lens of the most ubiquitous hormone of the body to see if in fact that might be part of the trigger and the reason. And in my opinion, I think it has a lot to do with it.
I'm remembering now, I think one or two people did book in with me over the years who had some form of what we would class as dysfunctional breathing. Maybe they've got asthma or something and they're over breathing. And I'm sure a few people did say they had excessive burping. And now I'm thinking, is that the body's way of dealing with that over breathing?
Could it absolutely? I mean,
Could
it
be.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
once again, I tell you, the academic world, sometimes their hair goes on fire talking to me because I will use a term called overwhelming circumstantial evidence. I mean, that is such an oxymoron when I say that, and I do that to bother them and get under their skin. But if there's just all of the different data points start all pointing one direction, shouldn't you go through that door and look in that direction, right?
Yes.
So that's what I tend to do to get my ideas and concepts initially, but I also have interacted with academia. I mean, 28 publications with the likes of Harvard, Mayo Clinic, Cincinnati Children's. Those three institutions alone constantly fight for the number 1, 2, and 3 position here in the United States for research organizations. This is not stuff I've done in my garage.
Yeah.
So there is an enormity of literature out there to corroborate these things that we both have come to realize that CO2 is a wonderful part of your body.
Yeah, it's such a treat to pick your brains on this. It really is, especially with all this experience you've got in research. I wanted to ask one more thing on dead space. So this is around an egg's worth. What about the rest of the dead space? That's like from here all the way down. How much is that volume?
So dead space means that an area does not actually respire So, for example, no carbon dioxide passes through your sinuses. No oxygen comes in through your sinuses, or if it does, it's just trivial, right? So, and yet it's part and attached to the respiratory tree. So that's called dead space.
Mm.
That starts at the tip of the nares and it goes all the way throughout your frontal sphenoid, ethmoid sinuses, and all of the aspects of your upper pharynx and all of the upper airways. None of those actually exchange gases. It includes all the way down your trachea until it gets out into the very first bronchus. And then you start getting alveoli, which are little clusters of sacs, if you will.
Mm.
They have massive amounts of surface area. You remember me talking about a business card on top of a tennis court. Literally, the amount of surface area, if we could spread all of the surface area of all those alveoli in your lungs out flat, they would be the size of a tennis court. And that's what your body has evolved to do, to be able to exchange molecules of carbon dioxide and oxygen. So getting back to the sinuses, there's not that much space that's in there. Our devices regulate this, and we exhale into these masks that are very exactingly made to your body's presumed tidal volumes. And we make estimates and algorithms to do that. But if you say, hey, Dave, I'd like my CO2 to go up 0.5%, we would give you a certain size Sage rebreather mask. If you say I would like it to go up a full 1%, and there are reasons why we would go one percentage versus another. So in traumatic brain injury protection and even reversal that we've been doing in our labs, we are up around 1%. And for sleep apnea, we're not even a fifth of that. And all of these are completely harmless levels of CO2. You cannot feel this. So it's almost like breathing through a snorkel. In many regards, as far as the safety of this technology, you just can't be harmed. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
And so just like with your breathing exercises, the safety is there.
Yes. Yeah. What I'm just trying to understand is, I know that you place a lot of importance and emphasis on the sinus areas and how they're holding CO2, and we rebreathe that back in. But my lay understanding is, but we're also doing that with the rest of that dead space, right? Or is there something different about the sinus area versus the remainder of the dead space before we get to the actual lung gas exchange?
No, I would say dead space is dead space.
Okay.
Partly what we are specifically working on our rebreathers is the physiology of a giraffe's way of doing it, right? So when you look at a head ramming sheep, and of course I just happen to have a head ramming sheep here for your audience, right? And what's amazing with a head ramming sheep are these horn cores. So these horn core is all these intricate little passageways. And if this animal was alive and I put my hand over this, I could literally expand and contract its lungs by breathing through this horn core. So a horn core, again, means directly attached to the respiratory tree. Then the animal has this, which you would think would block the ability of any gas from moving, but it turns out that the horn itself is completely hollowed. So it's Gabriel, come blow your horn. You can't blow through an antler. So what then I found out was, if you dump this down into a vat of water, it just bubbles come streaming up from it. This is permeable to gas. So when the head ramming sheep exhales, this fills up, and when it re-inhales, the CO2 is no longer 35, which again, a head ramming sheep is a mammal, just like you and I. Head ramming sheep's partial pressure of CO2 is 47. When you look at the trachea of a giraffe, and then the giraffes have the largest sinus passages of any mammal, they also have a huge level of CO2, and they're not 35 like you and me. They're not 47 like a head ramming sheep. They're 57 on their CO2 levels. So what are these animals doing? And they seem to be tolerant of unbelievable impacts. I mean, these creatures have to have a physiology to protect their brains. And it's not just a helmet. We've already got a helmet. Right? Why does it make sense to put another helmet on nature's helmet? So we've come about figuring out that it's all revolving around CO2 and the wonderful benefits, including this tiny rise in intracranial volume, which again happens every time you yawn. So if you fear the rise in intracranial volume, then probably should never yawn the rest of your life, right? So we know we can't do that. We know it's a harmless physiology. It's built in us for a reason. Now we're taking advantage of that reason.
Yeah. I had one of my community members actually, we do yawning in one of our classes. It just is a way of like relaxing and stretching. And she actually said, I don't like doing it because I noticed, I think she said like her Apple Watch or something detects that she's stressed when so would that would make sense, right? Because you're putting that extra blood flow into the brain. Would that do something to the heart rate for a couple of seconds when you're breathing?
Well, here's the thing also. So what a yawn does is it activates your attentional network. Okay. So creatures take advantage of this. So if you've got a small little furry creature and it comes out of the protected dark part of the forest out into the open, guess what it does? It starts to yawn because it wants to be attentionally aware. It wants to be spatially aware. And that attention rise is due to that diversion of blood. Remember, the yawning causes a collusion of all at 4 places in the animal's jugulars. Oh, by the way, if you have a spine, you have an omohyoid muscle. Every single creature on the planet Earth that has a spine has this ability to yawn and raise the intracranial volume. Now, when that blood volume goes up, the cerebral spinal fluid goes down your spinal cord, and inside that CSF way up here in the brain space are all the metabolites and the sleepy substances. And when that drops away from the brain, poof, you're just made more awake. That's what happens when you get up in the morning. You want to be more awake and alert. So it's possible, you threw me with this question, but trying quickly on thinking on my feet, if your attentional awareness goes up, your Apple Watch might sense that as being more tense and awake and alert and things of this nature. So interestingly enough, if you've ever seen those little mercat animals that are in colonies out on prairies,
Yes.
turns out when they come up out of their hole and they see an eagle out there that might be predator for them, they yawn. And I'll be darned if you don't see how addictive yawning is.
Yeah.
And it's my premise. I don't have proof of this. Again,
Yeah.
it's just evidence for this.
So cool.
That may be why we know that
Okay.
yawning is so damned addictive. Maybe it's us embedding in us the same warning signals that you see these little mercats and other animals might be doing as well. We also know that Olympic level athletes, right before the big race, you'll see them warming up and they yawn because they want to be as awake and alert as they possibly can. And that yawning pushes away the old cerebral spinal fluid, enabling it to take the sleepy substances away from the cranial space and be more attentionally awake and alert as well. So once again, that would be my guess as to what your colleague was struggling with.
So when we're up late and we're tired and we're yawning constantly, that's not actually our body trying to put us to sleep. That's actually trying to keep us awake so we don't just pass out. Wow. Okay. I always thought the yawn was putting us to sleep. That's fascinating. That's really, really fascinating.
I'll throw another one which might blow you away as well. So it turns out in the traumatic brain injury world, there are all these conundrums that no one's ever been able to figure out. And it turns out if you're an alcoholic and you're driving and you have a car full of people that haven't had anything to drink and you slam into a tree, the alcoholic gets up, walks away, and has no brain injury. The people that weren't drinking are the ones that ended up with the brain injury. Here's why. So, in my opinion, so this is Dr. Dave trying to solve another conundrum that the scientific world has not been able to figure out. Alcohol is a known raiser of your intracranial volume. So as that full-fledged alcoholic's been drinking all this time, their volume is as high as it can go and their brain is locked in place. So just like airbags and just like your pretensioners and your seatbelts, the alcoholic has all that going on. People that haven't been drinking, they have that extra space where the brain can rattle around. And that's, again, the theory that I evolved called slosh theory as to why that might be the case. You'll also be amazed to find out that withdrawing from alcohol does the exact opposite. It drops your intracranial volume and pressure. So if you've been drinking all night and then you start yawning, it's your alcohol level starting to come down, and your brain going, oh, wait a minute, do I want that? Maybe I should yawn and try to keep that back up so I'm more attentive and awake and alert.
Wow. Wow. Incredible.
Again, these are
Yeah.
theories, but to
No,
me, it is
fascinating.
putting 1 + 1 = 2
Yes.
and that thread. And if you don't agree with me, I would put
Yeah.
forth that you give me a theory that's better.
I love it.
So
I
I'm
love it.
totally okay to listen to
Yeah.
it, but to poo-poo
Yeah.
these types of theories that to me make some kind of a logic train on things that no one's been able to figure out.
Yeah.
It's all related to slosh, jugular compression, and CO2.
Yeah. Let's link this then to SIDS, and why certain people get altitude sickness. I know you've got some theories or some evidence on this. So maybe if you could talk a bit about sudden infant death syndrome and what your thoughts are on why that occurs more for some people.
Very controversial, and my company struggled with going down the pathway of SIDS. It's very hard to study infants. There's a lot of emotions involved.
Yes.
Parents are involved. So it's very expensive to go down this route, and then there aren't that many people out there. So the benefit to the company as an entity that needs to survive financially made it difficult. We actually created some prototypes, and we feel very confident that we may have figured out a depth and level of sudden infant death that others may have been overlooking. And it has to do with CO2 and something called the nasal cycle. Now, the nasal cycle is something that's really cool. And I'm telling you again, if you look it up, it says no one knows why it exists. But I have a theory why it does exist. And
Mm-hmm.
here's the nasal cycle. So all of us have had a cold, or we're laying there alone in our own thoughts as we're trying to sleep. And I'll be damned if one side of our nasal passage fills up with what we thought was just snot. And so we start trying to blow it out, and we can't blow it out. And it's just very frustrating. And we start to even get soreness around it, only to have an hour later, it's the other side that's filled up with what seems to be snot. We now have an opening on this side, but now this one's completely occluded. Well, it turns out it's not due to snot. It's due to just a vascular engorgement of the venous structures called a plexus of veins in that passage. And that nasal cycle is amazing because we've actually identified how this reflex goes throughout the body. And this reflex goes all the way back in through our shoulder, underneath our shoulder, into our armpits, and then goes into the T12 level of your spine in your back. Now, how in the world did we come up with this? Well, people that are in car accidents and they get their severing of that T10, T11 have lost the nasal cycle. It doesn't work anymore. But if they have a fracturing, a severing of their spinal cord down underneath T12, then their nasal cycle is intact. Well, guess what? Just putting a what do you call it? Crutches underneath your armpit triggers the nasal cycle because it's compressing the nerve as it goes through your armpit. And guess what they tell moms to do with their babies? Just lay them flat on their backs. Don't let them be on their sides, right? Because when you're on your side, you're all crunched up and the arm is compressed. And I'll be darned, what if that's triggering the nasal cycle? Because if it is, then what ends up happening is it would occlude one side of the nasal passage, and everyone in the audience can try this. If you occlude one of your nostrils, your resistance to airflow suddenly goes up because most of the airflow is coming through the nose. If you close your mouth and just breathe through your nose, you've now are breathing in 60% resistance, right? So that causes an increased work of breathing that has to occur. And in an infant that's just out there trying to stay alive, that could have a significant effect on just suddenly causing them to pop their mouth open. And what happens with mouth breathing? CO2 drops. Well, remember, we're all carboxylic breathers. We breathe because our carbon dioxide goes up. We don't breathe because our oxygen goes down. So it turns out in the literature that and they've done this artificially with neonatal experimentation, just raising the CO2 level or dropping the CO2 level. And what they found was if the CO2 drops by 2 millimeters of mercury, the baby goes completely apneic, stops breathing. 2. But we know that literally breathing through your nose raises your CO2, or suddenly opening your mouth lowers your CO2 by 3. So there's huge fluctuations and variations in the CO2 level of a baby by merely changing their nose breathing and mouth breathing. So we actually created a technology, patented all of this, and using pacifiers, we can give back that nasal passage breathing. Now, in the first 6 months, the baby is trying to open sinuses. So they're born and their sinuses are closed. But very quickly, they need to get those sinuses. That dead space needs to increase so that they can get their CO2 level up. And I'll be darned, if you look at the literature, the baby's sinuses are pretty much fully developed before the first year. And SIDS disappears before the first year. Yeah, I heard that. You gotta wonder, could they be connected, right? So then I went to the literature and I found that literature has corroborated the fact that the babies do have dysfunctional breathing, if you will, in these early stages. And so what we have not done yet, but we're looking for partners. If somebody wants to do something like that with us, we would love to help support studies that actually demonstrate that that CO2 level can be held and maintained so it never drops. I'm never going to be able to convince a young parent, hey, let me experiment and let's throw 6 or 8 or 12% CO2. It's just not going to happen. But if we say, hey, it's an aberrant, unnormal thing to suddenly drop your CO2, and would it be okay if we just held your baby's CO2 where it always is? That's doable, right? And I think that that's something that we're entertaining as a company to move down that pathway as well. We've patented all of this, but we would love to have sort of the bandwidth to move down that pathway. Sure. SIDS is such an emotional, horrible thing to happen to families. And even just to have people know that they didn't do something wrong. I have a cardiology friend that when I showed him this physiological mechanism, because he was so devastated, he had his baby die on his chest while he was sleeping on the couch. And he carried around all this guilt his whole life, thinking that he had done something to that baby. And I'm very adamant about the fact that I really don't believe that had anything to do with it. I believe it's CO2 related.
Jesus.
I think it's correctable.
You're speaking to the right audience, because I think if you'd come to me, my son's 2 now, it's just 2 months and 2 years. I think if you said to me, look, can we do some CO2 work? I'd be like, yeah, come on, Dr. Dave, let's do it. So I would imagine you're amongst the right people, breath instructors and people that are into breathing. So yeah. So just as a quick subject, if people want to reach out about that, how do they do that? If are you looking for people to volunteer? What would that look like?
Yeah, I would probably email me is the best way to do it. You'll probably give my email contact.
We'll put that down below. Yeah,
to people down below.
Okay,
that would be the quickest, best way to get to us. Right now we're not in a position. We actually believe we've reversed brain injury, and traumatic brain injury is the number one cause of human suffering and cost, and to be able to not only prevent it to the tune of 75% with their Q collar, and then to turn around and reverse it, it's just for mankind's sake, we've had to take a turn to the left.
Yes.
So it'd have to be more companies to get involved with us that would want to partner or venture with us, because then we can assist them and turn the path of science, if you will. If moms and dads and people that are worried want to connect to me, I'm happy to talk to them, but I don't know what I can do, as we would need to have the bandwidth, which we don't have.
No, that makes sense. I got a bit too excited there. I want to ask one thing, because again, I've had a 2-year-old. I've been a breath coach for years. I was obsessed with his breathing. His respiratory rate when he was born was really high, but apparently that's really normal. I'm talking like the first 48 hours. I was on the phone to all my breath coach friends going, what's going on here? So babies get colds, right? And babies get stuffy. And when they get stuffy, they open their mouths. So are we saying that when a baby's got a cold, they're at more risk of SIDS based on that theory?
Yes, in my opinion, now this
Wow.
is an opinion, not fact, right? So, and I also want to tell the audience, do not go reach for a paper bag. You cannot breathe in a paper bag. Every
Um,
single time you breathe in a paper bag, you extract 5% of the oxygen. So you breathe in 21%, you exhale out 16.
mm,
So if you start thinking, oh, geez, I heard this crazy eye Dr. Dave out there, and maybe I should be breathing in some orifice of some, I just swear to you, do not do that. This is extraordinarily dangerous,
okay.
and you could harm yourself or even die by trying to elicit something. So the techniques and the devices that we've evolved have been able to get around that, and they're as close as fail-safe as you can get. It's fashioned on what nature has used for 20 million years to evolve us into doing this. You can't breathe into a bag.
Okay. So I'm just thinking now, if I was watching this podcast 2 years ago and I heard what we've just spoke about, I would be freaking out right now. So because I'm thinking, oh, my son's got a cold, so where can we send people, or what advice can we give them with their babies? Because I know this is obviously a huge subject, but I don't want to just dig a little bit and go, all right, viewers, good luck with your babies with colds and stuff. So what can we
Well,
do to kind of help them a little bit
let
in that
me
area?
give you an observation in the literature that no
Mm-hmm.
one has flown with because they couldn't
Mm-hmm.
explain it. So it turns out the Eastern cultures, they don't have SIDS.
Okay.
Sudden infant death syndrome doesn't occur in Japan, right? It just doesn't occur down the eastern side of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And yet here in the western side, we have tried to convince mothers to put the babies out of the bed and away from them, either in another room or on the other side of the room, because guess what they were afraid of? They were afraid of either rolling over onto the baby at night, or that the CO2 would somehow be causing the baby to stop breathing. Now let's stop for a minute. We breathe, and all the chemosensors in our brain stems are there to cause us to breathe when CO2 is around. Why would CO2 be dangerous? And
Mm-hmm.
then here's the thing that's amazing. In the Eastern culture, they all sleep with their babies. We don't.
Mm,
In my opinion, it's just an opinion. Don't hold me to this, please. A total disclaimer here. In my opinion, you can tell I'm not 24 years of age anymore, but I have had 3 kids, and if I'd known this at the time, I would have made sure that that baby, at a minimum, was sitting as close to the bed as possible and potentially slept with us in order to be able to avert SIDS. In my opinion.
yeah. Yeah. No, we're there. He's 2, and he's still kicking me in the face in the middle of the night. We've got a big old mattress on the floor where we all share it. So at some point, I was listening to Gabor Mate's work. I don't know if you know him. He's a child psychologist, and he's like, at some point, he'll tell you when he wants his own bed. So we're just kind of at that stage at the minute. But yeah, no, that's interesting. So when my brain always goes with this, Dave, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because I had a sleep coach on a little while ago, and she says something very similar. She goes, the mother's CO2 is regulating the baby's breath,
Correct.
breastfeeding, all the rest of it. I thought, oh, isn't that fascinating? But when we think about our hunter-gatherer ancestors who slept outside amongst the stars, they weren't locked in rooms with CO2. So my brain hurts when I think about why this is something we need to deal with now, but only just a few generations ago, we were in the fresh air all night. So could you give
Yeah,
us a
but
little thought on
it's
that?
true that a brisk wind's going to take the CO2, but you'll still have a bubble of CO2 around you if there's 2 people, 3 people
Okay.
in the same TP or
Okay.
whatever the case.
Interesting.
You're going to love this because the safe sleep recommendations for babies include breastfeeding. They don't know why. They just made an
Yeah.
observation that breastfeeding seems to, well, you're going to love this one. So breast milk actually has a better, what's called carbon dioxide coefficient. So in other words, breast milk, rather than milk that you would get off of a can somewhere, actually raises the baby's CO2 greater than it would in a baby that was bottle fed, not
Yes.
breastfed. So I felt like if my theory had to work, I had to be able to have an explanation for all the observations that are out there as to what has seemingly worked in the literature. But if you look into that, they don't know why it works. They just observed it, right? And therefore they're recommending it. Well, I believe it all stems back to CO2. I have logic trains, and so it's my strong feeling that it's sleep disordered breathing, just like in humans and in sleep apnea. And oh, by the way, this type of rebreathing eradicates sleep apnea. It's just
Mm,
mind bending. So there's
mm,
two different types. There's central sleep apnea as well as obstructive sleep apnea. One of the people on my advisory board is Jerome Dempsey, probably the most brilliant sleep doctor on the planet Earth. He's a PhD out of Madison, Wisconsin. He had come up with a device to, guess what? Rebreathe your own CO2 at night. And he got an NIH $500,000 grant and was able to demonstrate a 93% resolution of obstructive sleep apnea. And the literature shows a 100% eradication of central sleep apnea, which, guess what? There's no treatment for that. So when he and I met, I kind of wanted to point out that the patents that we had were multiple years prior to his patents, and that, by the way, your device was this massive servo motor device, bigger than a suitcase, and our device is this little thing, right? No bells, no whistles, no tubes, nothing. He dropped his project and joined my team. Right. So we're not to market with this just yet, but we are getting ready to start doing clinical trials. We've done multiple anecdotal studies on humans, then they've just loved what it has done for their sleep. So
yeah.
stay tuned. We're
Stay
coming
tuned.
forth with a way of actually causing eradication of sleep apnea, which is another scourge of mankind, because those CPAP devices are just hell to
Yeah.
use.
Yeah. I can't, as I said to you on our first meeting, how do I get my hands on one of those masks? You know, I'm so excited to play with it. So just talk us through the sleep apnea with that mask, because this is very interesting. So you put it on for how long? You're not sleeping with the mask, I'm guessing. So just talk us through what they do. Put it on for a period of time and then they go to
You would
sleep.
need there are certain conditions. So raising your CO2 causes a change in your blood-brain barrier, and proteins and sugars can suddenly pass into the cranial space, and then that raises your intracranial volume. Now, when
Mm,
you take the CO2 away, your blood-brain barrier stops. And if you remember high school biology, it's called a semi-permeable membrane. And so that is now actively pumping out the proteins and sugars that came in, but that takes 2.5 hours. So it
mm,
turns out that breathing your own CO2 for just 10 minutes raises your intracranial volume for hours. And so we did that study in rodents, and we were able to demonstrate that just breathing on our device, we didn't use our device, we used exact levels of CO2 that our device has, because we couldn't get a device as small on a rat's nose and mouth, right? So we just delivered the exact level of CO2, and we blocked 70% of brain injury by just doing that. And the benefit lasted for hours.
mm,
That's an exciting technology that we're hoping to bring to
mm,
the world shortly.
mhm.
All CO2 related.
And with sleep apnea, if you put that mask on for 10 minutes, you get a
No,
couple of
so
hours.
in that
Okay.
case, we need, in sleep apnea, we need to change the chemistry at your base of your brainstem. That has nothing to do with semi-permeable membrane. So you have to be breathing this to get that benefit. So
Okay.
the good news is this is a small little collapsible thing that's only weighs 2 ounces, and there's no bells and whistles, no cleaning. You just throw this in your dishwasher. So
Mm,
we've just got something that is light. It's still going to be on your face, but here's the good news. There's no positive pressure. In sleep apnea CPAP devices, it's a continuous positive airway pressure, That's devastating in many regards. First of all, you have to strap that puppy on tight so you don't get leakage up into your eyeball around your nose, which is really hard to seal things against. And then guess what? If they usually generate about 10 centimeters of water air pressure, that exceeds the ability of your salivary glands to work, which means you have the worst dry mouth on the planet Earth. And if you don't have saliva, you start getting cavities. So there's all these devastating things that occur with a positive airway pressure this does not have. Still need to sleep with it all night long. We have
Gotcha.
these clever little ways of exhale ports are on 4 different areas. So if you lay on one side, we made sure that the airway resistance is not impeded. You
Amazing.
still won't feel any change in the work of breathing. Now, if you lay on all 4 of these and occlude them all, that's no different than you just laying face down in a pillow. And we hope and intend to prove that that will arouse you enough to roll over, right? Because most people would do the same thing. So we can't block every possible situation and scenario, but we do make it as fail-safe as possible.
That makes sense. Okay, so yeah, because my initial thoughts were you give it to somebody for a while. If they're already a chronic mouth breather, you take it off, they're just going to reset their CO2 levels quite quickly, right? If they do that.
That's correct.
Yeah, so you
Right.
keep
So
it on.
you'll
Okay,
need to have that back on. Now,
gotcha.
interestingly enough, if your CO2 goes to 6%, you won't sleep. Right. So 6% causes headaches. 6% makes you aroused. You think something bad's going to happen. Anxiety comes up. And even if you're at 1%, you're getting some arousals. Okay. So we use 1%. You can't feel it during daytime and it's harmless, but not going to sleep as well as you can. So that's why we are finding very, very tough. So as big as this is, when this delivers a full 1% to me, the size of this is going to be significantly smaller. I do have, this is another one for sleep. This is about 20% smaller than this one.
Okay.
And then we'll have even another one that's smaller than that. I just don't happen to have it on hand. But those are the things that we're studying, and we'll hopefully have gotten all the kinks out of that for you.
So
In
cool.
obstructive sleep apnea, it's different than central sleep apnea. In central sleep apnea, again, you trigger a little bit of CO2, which is why we're carboxic breathers, and you breathe. In every form in the literature known to man, if you deliver tiny amounts of CO2, in the literature it's 1, 2, and 3%, which you don't need, we feel, but that's what the literature used, then the central sleep apnea disappeared. Well, the next question was wait a minute, Dr. Dempsey showed that obstructive sleep apnea also was improved to 90%. So it turns out that nature uses CO2 as a way to put tone in the upper airway muscles. So just like the Inspire device that implants a device and then digs down and puts it on like a pacemaker over your chest, and you put a little magnet over it and electricity goes up and the tone of your upper airway muscles go up, CO2 does that too. So turns out this is far more physiologically similar to what the body's used to. It doesn't cost $60,000 and you don't have to go back in for a change of your batteries and a surgery to do so every so often. So we think that we have a competing technology. We are certainly, again, I'm going to say this again, we're not to market. Please do not contact me for these devices. They have to be FDA authorized. We're nowhere near that. We have to demonstrate in the literature all the claims that we're making. So we're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, and thank you for coming and talking about this so early. Even at this stage, I know everyone's going to be so excited about these masks. Now, I've got something. I've got a CO2 monitor somewhere. Where have I put it? Right here. So, I would love to get your thoughts on this. So it's not doing it in the 1% that you've got. It's this right now, parts per million is 2265. I think it's reversed on my screen. Okay. And it's gone to red because it's too high. And what this generally says on this device, this is a company out of, I think, Lithuania. I think they say 400 is outside, 400 parts per million. So it's a slightly different version of what you're using. Indoors, 800 is considered good. Once you get above 1,500 parts per million, it starts to freak out. And I'm at 2265 right now. So I'll just give you a little bit more, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So James Nestor was on a pod. He came on my podcast and talked about this as well, actually. He found a study where children were at 1,500 parts per million, and they scored 50% worse on the test than when they were at 800, I think it was. And so there's this whole thing that's starting to be out there. This is also showing the same thing, which is once you get above 1,500 parts per million, cognitively you can't function properly, apparently. So you open the windows, all this sort of stuff. But then when I spoke to a guy called Dr. Peter Litchfield, who is a CO2 expert. He's like, no, it's probably good for you. It's actually good for you to have more CO2 in the room. We probably do need more CO2. So could you help give us a little bit? Because I get so confused here because some people are saying it's toxic at this level and it's a real problem and we can't think clearly. Anders Olsen doesn't know the answer either. We were trying to pick apart the day. He's got theories. And some people say, actually, no, it's actually good for you. So would you give us your thoughts, please, Dr. Dave, on what's going on here?
So on your device, 2,200 or so parts per million is approximately 2.2%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So just to let you know, OSHA, which is our Occupational Safety and Hazard Association, it's a government entity here, says that you're not allowed to be that way. If your environment at your business is up over 2%, that you're not allowed to stay in that environment. And they recommend that if you're at 800 parts per million in your business, right?
Yep.
Because they can only control businesses,
Mm-hmm.
that's considered safe and that the air, quote, is clean, because they're trying to say that carbon dioxide is somehow toxic.
Mm.
Carbon dioxide is not a toxin. It is an asphyxiant, so that if you have huge levels, 30, 40%, you're going to push your oxygen out of your body and you're not going to be able to have that wonderful life-giving oxygen. But when you get down in the percentages that you're talking about, it gets a little foggy. So, for example, all of the breweries in the United States are well over 2.5% continually. So
Mm-hmm.
OSHA had to make an exception. It turns out that United States likes its beer, likes its wine, and they were not going to be able to go through prohibition and say that nobody's allowed to brew anymore. If you go and take a tour through any brewery and you see the mash bubbling up, well, you know what those bubbles are, right? That's CO2. So first thing is it didn't make sense to me why there was this unbelievable backlash, and then it hit me. All had to do with climate change and the claim that carbon dioxide was somehow warming our planet. Well, you're going to know, and your audience is going to know, I don't fall on the side that believes that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
very political and almost a religious hatred of carbon dioxide. Whereas I want to remind you again, they're actually talking about scrubbing the CO2 out of our environment somehow. And here we are at some of the lowest CO2 levels the planet has ever had. And if we're already down at 400 parts per million and we scrub it down to 280, plants start dying. And if plants die, animals die right afterwards. So it makes no sense to me that that would be a bad thing. I also would put to you that our academic world has been somewhat tainted by the fact that if you come out and ask the NIH or National Science Foundation for monies to do a study to show that carbon dioxide's good, you're not getting funded.
Mm.
So I question the basis of them claiming that intellectually these kids did bad at 1,500 or so. Okay, because there's just as many articles out there that show that you increase your arterial supply to your brain with that CO2. You increase your awareness and alertness with CO2. So from a pure physiological standpoint, it doesn't make sense. And if the data doesn't make sense, you need more studies. That means that I'm not jumping on the bandwagon and saying it is or it isn't. I'm saying this is confusing to me and it doesn't make sense. So we need to do larger studies so that we can actually get statistical power on these studies. And I can't remember. I've actually seen these articles. I've got them somewhere in my files. I could probably look them up again. But I contend that if we did, we might find that there are smaller studies that are doing that. But once again, governments and bureaucracies just jumped on that and tried to claim that the CO2 is toxic in some way, shape, or form. It is not toxic. It's a part of every cell, and it's more ubiquitous to life than actually oxygen is. The body can live without periods of time without any oxygen, cannot live without the CO2. It's just too critically important.
Yeah, we flew from London to Mexico for a honeymoon last year, and I took this with me, and I thought, because I've heard it's horrific on planes, and it was about the same as this actually, about 2.2, so it's pretty in like what you're saying, pretty okay range. I thought it was going to like some people said in the car it can jump to 8,000 parts per minute, but I've not seen that. Again, seems to be about that's the top range that I've seen. So you wouldn't be concerned if I was sleeping at that sort of level in my bedroom. That's not a bad level to be at. I don't need to suddenly open all the windows and doors. It's not causing any harm.
No, I would
Yeah.
say your central sleep apnea and regular sleep
Mhm.
apnea might actually be improved.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's fascinating. That's really, yeah, I hadn't considered the political aspects of this. It never even dawned on me. So that's true. Thank you. That's
I'll
truly
be the first
fascinating.
one to admit to you that there
Yeah.
is a faction of the academic world that literally their hair is on fire today if they were
Yeah.
to watch this. They just do not believe
Sure.
and will not buy what we're selling. But I would contend that for every study they have to say that it is harmful, I can pull out studies that show that it is not harmful.
Interesting.
And I still say the logic of it, right? So extraordinary claims take extraordinary data, right?
Mm,
To try to position itself. And I state that they don't have extraordinary data. They have data. I get it. But is it biased? And that's what a lot of the CO2 people and people that believe CO2 to be good and beneficial, we claim foul. Wait a minute. Let's go look at that study. And of course, they don't even talk to us. They think we're somehow evil, that we believe that CO2 is a positive. So
gotcha.
then your audience may have had to live with that. And I live with the fact that I'm generating technologies to improve and elevate your CO2 ever so slightly. I think the biggest barrier to it being successful is people have been made to be afraid of CO2, and fear allows people to be controlled. And I think that this is very freeing. Your podcast and your belief in what you're doing frees people up to benefit from a physiology that's been known for 100 years to be beneficial
Yes.
or more.
Yeah. Well, at what point would you start to be concerned about indoor CO2 levels? If like, what would be a number to be thinking about?
So in sleep apnea, the literature's quite clear. You have arousals at 3%. So you're
Okay.
getting up there at 2,200 parts per million is 2.2%.
Mm-hmm.
So at 3%, your sleeping patterns are not going to be good, which is again why these you can't go over 1%. Can't do it. It's not possible. We fail-safed it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I would say is if you want to put it in a room, if the room is tiny and enclosed and you shut the door, oh yeah, you're going over 3%, but nobody dies from that. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you may be, it's just like somebody poking you multiple times throughout the night. When you wake up the next day, you may not feel so refreshed, but you are not going to be harmed. Not
Okay.
from 3%.
Interesting. Because my sleep quality is not great at the minute. And this, again, my son's in the bed, my wife's in the bed, I'm in the bed, the doors are all shut. I'm going to go and test it again tonight now, because I suspect it's over 3% in our bedroom at night. And that's probably messing our sleep up a little bit. So I'll check
It
that
might.
out. Yeah.
Again, but
Yeah.
well, he's over 2. He's got sinuses, so I
Sure.
contend that the literature is quite clear. The
Yeah.
chance of SIDS is almost 0.
Oh yeah, I'm not worried about that. I think it's just more my selfish sleep quality score isn't great at the minute. And obviously we've got a kid in the bed anyway, but I'm just thinking maybe we need to crack a window. Anyway, that's really helpful. I know we're almost out of time, and I just want to pick your brains on one last thing, because you said something and I almost couldn't sleep the night you told me it. So there was something you mentioned around somebody was clinically brain dead and you gave them
Yeah.
the mask. Just tell us that story, please. Just
So
finish us off.
we're back on traumatic brain injury for a moment. I've basically devoted my life and my career to the fact that CO2 can be so therapeutic in and around the event of a brain injury. So what people in the scientific world have overlooked or chosen to overlook, I don't know, is that when you have a traumatic brain injury, you pour out the fight and flight chemicals. That's adrenaline, noradrenaline, glucagon, and cortisol. Adrenaline and noradrenaline, everybody that's physiologically minded knows that your pulse and your heart rate just takes off when your adrenaline goes up. But people forgot that so does your respiratory rate. So now artificially, even though your body doesn't sense that you need to breathe so much, you're going to be breathing faster after a brain injury. And the bad news is down goes your CO2. So as you hyperventilate, down goes the CO2. As low as 40% of the normal arterial flow to your brain occurs in the first hour after a brain injury. And our literature says the first 6 minutes of a brain injury is the most devastating of all. You have this chemical cascade that calcium and potassium and all these changes occur. And guess what? With that low CO2, the body's brain cannot metabolize sugar anymore. So we started to realize that, well, wait a minute, we have a device that is small and light, and a soldier could carry it with them. And if you're out on a football field and somebody thinks you might have had a concussive event, we could have this available, and that could be placed on that individual in seconds, right? So the first thing that we did when I started talking to my neurotrauma research team here at the University of Cincinnati, the head of the department has now become a personal friend of mine because he thought I was a joke at first. I have 16 different talks that I've been giving, and he started coming to all of them. And I saw him back there in the back of the audience, and he kept coming to the same one over and over and over again. And he looked at me afterwards because we went out for a beer, and he says, Dave, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I think I've learned more in an hour than I've learned in all these conferences. He says, where do you come up with all this stuff? And I said, it's in every textbook. It's not even complex physiology, but you need all of them. I need to bring up your physics. I need to bring up your chemistry. I need to have also your anatomy and your physiology. And I need somebody that can keep track of all of this because it all works at the same time. And one thing that affects all of them is CO2. So I contend that we might be able to change brain death because it turns out Dr. Jed Hardings is the world's leading authority on monitoring for spreading depolarizations. Spreading depolarizations are considered tsunamis or tidal waves. It's how the brain dies. And his statement to me was, Dave, once the tsunamis start going flatline, you're dead. We can't stop them. Nothing stops them. And I'm like, well, I've got an issue with that statement. And I said, don't you have data on all these people are under intensive care? And he goes, well, sure I do. And I said, well, at the bottom, I actually was an internal medicine, chief of medicine, worked in intensive care units all my life. I said, at the bottom, don't you monitor carbon dioxide? And he goes, no, you don't. I go, well, we're here in the bar. I'll bet you a beer that you do. Well, we do. And he went back and he was just stunned. He goes, I can't believe I have all that data. I didn't even look at it. Right. So he went back and he looked and he saw that every single time the CO2 went up, the spreading depolarizations went down. And every single time that CO2 went down, the spreading depolarizations went up. And then 2 weeks after that, and I ended up giving a talk to the neurotrauma team, right? 2 weeks, I'm out on a boat on a cruise with my wife, and I didn't realize that Jed was blowing up my phone trying to reach me because there he was standing over this 26-year-old kid that was in the neurointensive care unit, actually had a bolt to relieve some of the pressure. He was doing terribly. Spreading depolarizations were taking off. They were going flatline, and they actually reached the clinical criteria of brain death. And the neurotrauma team started talking about going out to the family and getting permission to take this young kid off of the ventilator and allow him to die because it's not legal to keep a vegetable alive. And Jed says, well, guys, what about Dr. Dave, the bird doctor that was out here last month? Can't we just raise the CO2 up to head ramming sheep level 47 and see what happens? And they kind of rolled their eyes in the back of their heads and they talked amongst them. They go, oh, okay, fine. He's brain dead. What's the harm? Right. So they go out to the family, they get the permission. They're not trying to get their hopes up because they think that this is a little bit of lunacy, and they go back and they change the settings and the CO2 goes to 47. In 4 hours, all the spreading depolarizations were gone. The next morning, the kid woke up. A month later, he was discharged walking from the hospital. He was still brain injured, but he was walking out of the hospital when conventional medicine decided that he was gone. And this is all CO2. So what did we do? We went back to the lab and we ended up impacting rodents. Half of them had normal oxygen and CO2 ambient levels. And in half of these genetically identical animals, we gave them 2% CO2. Animals are less tolerant or more tolerant to CO2. So we had to give them a little more than a human would get. And we were able to demonstrate dramatic improvements in that animal. And all we did is deliver carbon dioxide level 2% for 1 hour and then sacrifice the animal the next day. And we were able to demonstrate unbelievable levels of correction of all these metabolic changes and cascades. And the endpoints that we used showed somewhere in the range, I hate to put a number to this until we publish it, almost 90% reduction in brain injury after the impact occurred. So I'm calling it CPR for the brain. Everybody knows that when somebody's having a heart attack, time is critical. And in a stroke, we know that time is brain. So we have every minute you lose 190 million brain cells that you're not getting oxygen to the brain. So I contend that the same thing happens in traumatic brain injury that occurs in a heart blockage. And so I'm calling it CPR for your brain. And if we can get these devices out to the world, out into all the different areas, again, places people congregate, athletic events, military scenarios, you get suffered by a brain injury, you might not even know it. So on our studies on high school kids, turns out only 1 or 2 people in an entire season have a concussion, yet hundreds of the kids have these little tiny microstructural changes in their brains after 1 season of play. Well, what if after each and every game, they breathed on our device for 30 minutes? It has to help. Now, we haven't done those studies. This, again, is our small company going out to change the world, but we've already changed sport with our Q collar. And the world is 45,000 of these in less than 2 years. You'll see them all over the NFL. All of our special forces are wearing these. So we're onto something. We found a rabbit hole, and as we keep trying to jump down the rabbit hole, we fall down 6 other rabbit holes. And we don't have the bandwidth and the money and whatever to go down them all. But oh my God, we are really having a fun time, and it's all CO2 related.
You're doing such important work. Just for the lay brain of mine, just explain to me, why do you think when someone's quote unquote brain dead and they have more CO2, what could possibly be happening that's bringing them back from that point? Is it a Bohr effect and more oxygen to the brain, or is it something else? What do you think causes that?
It's back to these spreading depolarizations, right? So spreading depolarizations are occurring after that brain dead scenario, and they are just taking off through the roof, and they're doing something called flatlining. And this has to do with each neuron. And in my opinion, it's something, and I'm going to bore everybody, it's chloride shifts. So if you're a physiologist out there, we were always taught that chloride just electrically neutralizes across membranes, and chloride just goes wherever. And if a oxygen goes and it's got a positive force, and the chloride's going to, and for electrical neutrality, that is not true. And the physiology world knows that chloride shifts have massive effects on what's going on. And guess what? I changed the chloride of every neuron's environment with 2 breaths. 2 breaths. This is huge. So this is my life's focus now. And everything I can do, I will do to make sure that we bring this to humanity, this way of literally giving life and giving brain. To me, it's almost more important to not injure my brain than living or dying. I'm okay going to my maker. I don't want to be brain dead or severely damaged on the planet. And if we can reverse his scourge of human suffering called traumatic brain injury to the tune of 5%, and yet our studies are showing 70, 80, and 90% improvements. Oh my Lord, we're on to some really cool stuff.
Yeah, very cool. We are 5 minutes over. Have you got time for one more question, or do you want to cut it there?
I'm totally fine. I'm all yours all morning.
This is a little bit more out there, or not. Are you familiar with the term earthing or grounding?
No, I'm not.
Oh, right. This might send you down a whole other rabbit hole. So there's a documentary on YouTube. I think it's called the Earthing movie, and the premise is this: humanity, like all other animals, was touching the planet for most of the time the planet's been here, right? And then about 60 or 70 years ago, we quote unquote disconnected. We put rubber on our shoes, plastic carpets, we insulated ourselves. And at that same time, we've seen a load of issues happening, including breath, but including inflammation in the brain, in the body, diseases, all these different things. So there's an electrical engineer called, his name's blanking me now, but it's in the I've interviewed him, it'll come back to me. He worked out we're disconnected. And so I've got, for example, an earthing sheet on my bed that connects me to, goes out the window and into the ground, and my body's connected to the planet. And apparently the oxygen's being absorbed better into the body when you've got the negative positive charge and you're connected, but also inflammation comes down, you can repair. So you've not come across any of that, I'm guessing, when it comes to CO2 and earthing at this stage. It sounds like it's probably new information for you.
Actually, I don't. I am actually very familiar with what you're talking about. I do not have any issue from a scientific physiological standpoint if you're using your grounding blanket on you. What I do say is remember that a magnetic field decays in an exponential manner, right? So if in fact you're at 1 inch away, right, and then you suddenly go to 3 inches, you're not 3 times less field, you're 27 times less field. It's 3 to the third power. Okay. So if you think that you can ground yourself by putting something on your underneath your bed or around your bed, which is, a foot, 6 inches or whatever, if it's on your person, you're probably getting a better grounding, if you will. And what you're doing is magnetic fields change electrical fields. The two are just not separable. Okay.
Interesting.
So it has there's some theory behind it. It's not my focus. I do not consider myself expert. But I have an enormous amount of formal training in all of the fields that you're talking about. And once again, it makes sense that it could happen. So here's where I'm at. If it can't hurt you, why not? Right? Okay. I do not believe that you could be harmed by doing that. Okay. I will leave you with something that you and your people will love. Birds, and they migrate. When they get ready to migrate, you look out there, they're all on telephone wires. They're all on power lines. Why? They're all out there. There are thousands of them. And then on top of that, if you go up there and look, most of them are even facing the same damn direction. So in my book, I talk about exactly the theory of why I believe I'm one of these people that when I see something and it just simply astounds me, I want to ask why, right? In the same breath, sorry for shilling the book, but fireflies, they only light on the way up. They don't light when they're coming down. Why? And why don't people ask about that? So once again, it's my brain that I'm tortured by this. I hope no one else has to live the world that I do. I will wake up in the middle of the night and come up with ideas and concepts and then just go attack them if possible. So I have thrown in the book a reason, in my opinion, why all those birds decide to go out on that wire where any predator bird can get them, right? Why not go and hide in a bush over there? There are reasons on that power wire why they're doing that, and it has to do with migration. So, and directionality of how birds actually find their way. So those are things that I think speak to your discussion about changing the electrical and magnetic field around me. Nature does that, right? And people will say, well, wait a minute, there weren't power wires 400 years ago. I get it. And in my contention, they may not have gotten to their migration places easily as being on these wires now. They are facilitating their capability. And if you know what degaussing is, it's a way of magnetism and changing the magnetism so that the polarity of the earth can be sensed by that creature. So if there's all these paramagnetic molecules in the brain and they're all going in different directions, then that little signal out there the earth is giving, it's lost. and
Mm.
it's in the chaos. But you go up on that wire and you degauss with a alternating current. Can't be direct current. Alternating current is what we use to make a magnetic field go flat, so that
Mm.
now the brain can sense these changes. So my point is please ask why, and
Yeah.
don't believe everything that people throw at you. You can find answers to things, and you don't have to just be spoon-fed what people are telling you. And then, of course, look for bias. There's always a reason people are doing what they're doing, including me. I mean, I'm stuck and I'm addicted to this,
Yeah.
and finding something that no one else has figured out, oh, that's a drug all by itself.
Yeah. Wow, what a beautiful way to end it. Thank you so much. It's been one of my favorite podcasts I've done in a very long time. I know people are going to love this. So you mentioned your book. Where's the best place we can send people? Is it to the book? Is it to a website?
If you go to my personal website, you can download the book. I'm here
Hmm.
in the United States, and we can't easily get the book over to
Hmm.
you if we're interested. But downloading it, I think it's under $10.
Hmm.
I think it cost me that much. I mean, I'm not making money on this, but a download can be done very simply if
Hmm.
you go to my particular webpage, which is again on the back here, and you'll of course give that at the bottom of this as well. You will find patents in there. You will find a lot of the visuals that are in my book and help you to understand the physiology of what's going on with brain injury and many other fun things.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, we'll make sure the links for people are directly down below. Thank you so much for your time. I'd love to do this again at some point in the future. I've learned so much. I know other people have. So really appreciate you. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep
Thank you, Mike.
helping humanity. And
Thank
we'll
you.
speak to you in the future. Thank you so much. Cheers. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Take care.
Cheers.